Good evening, and welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens, and today I would like to discuss one of the talks that I saw at the recent North Ohio HIMSS conference. NOHIMSS was great this year, lots of really fantastic content. I am not just saying this to toot my own horn because I was a speaker, but I found a lot of the talks really immediately relevant and very useful and very helpful. And the opening keynote for NOHIMSS this year was David Kaelber of MetroHealth talking about their experiences using artificial intelligence to reduce their no-show rate. And I thought this was really good. The way he teed it up was really interesting because MetroHealth, like many hospital systems, really struggles with their no-show rate. So they are they were seeing a no-show rate of about 36% in their ambulatory setting. So they thought, okay, well, if we're missing a little bit more than 1 in 3, their initial thought, a non-artificial intelligence approach was to say, well, we will just overbook. We will overbook these by 30%, and then that should pretty much even out. Except that wasn't really getting them where they wanted to go because they were still having cases where they were having no patients show up for the slots in which they were booked. They were having cases where a single patient was showing up in the slot, which is the desired end result. And then they were having cases where 2 patients showed up in the same slot, which was really problematic. It was leading to dissatisfied patients and dissatisfied caregivers. So Dr. Kaelber at MetroHealth discussed their approach with an artificial intelligence approach. And he called this kind of a black box approach. We're going to feed you all of our data. You're going to run it through your algorithm. And what it did is it kicked back basically for each patient kind of a risk score that they would develop a no-show. So they set their barriers, right? They said if the patient has, like this much % of no-showing, then we are going to go ahead and double book them. If the patient has a low probability of no-showing, then we're going to let them have that whole slot. They'll be the only patient booked in that slot. So they kind of ended up with a system in which some of the patients were shadow double booked. Some of the patients were treated kind of as shadow bookings, and they thought, well, let's see how this goes, right? This is a black box that is taking into account previous patient behavior, some other information about the patient, and it should be, it is able to predict with a fairly high degree of reliability whether this patient is likely to no-show or not. So they put this into effect. And Dr. Kaelber said, and I don't have slides in front of me, but I believe it took them 15 months to put this into effect. They had to pay, of course, to implement this. And he said the end result was that they did not see the reduction in no-shows that they anticipated. They still had cases where they were overbooked. They were double booked, 2 patients showing up at the same time. They still had dissatisfied caregivers, and they still had dissatisfied patients. So they took a really deep breath. They thought, okay, let's go back to the drawing board on this. So they went back and they looked at their workflow and they said, what is the desired action that we would like to take place here? What is it that we're hoping what patients will do if we think that they are a high probability to no-show? And they went back to Epic and they took a look at some of Epic's native tools for reducing no-show rates. And they ended up with a much more collaborative approach on the second time around. So they put some workflow in place so that if a patient was kind of flagged as being a high risk for a no-show, they would have coordinators call the patient. They would offer them transportation to their appointment. They would offer them to switch their in-person appointment to a virtual visit, perhaps. And so this approach, still using artificial intelligence, still making use of all of the data that is in MetroHealth's fantastic system, this approach was much more successful. It was statistically significantly successful in reducing the no-show rate from 36% to 33%. And this was, I thought, the really interesting point that Dr. Kaelber made. And I've got no scruples about telling you, I'm a big fan of Dr. Kaelber. I have been curious to know so much more about how Metro is using their data and under his guidance and his leadership, because he has so many really interesting thoughts. But his point was really good. So his point was kind of twofold. One is that black box AI solutions are rarely as impactful as you hope that they will be. And 2, the real impact of artificial intelligence is not one single solution that makes this huge crater of an impact. The real impact of artificial intelligence is these marginal gains across your entire enterprise. And I thought that was really interesting. It dovetails really nicely with what Dr. Mather and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, that artificial intelligence is already in so many places, basically invisible. And the impact in the healthcare system at this point is still largely that: make incremental changes with a really broad implementation, and you will see improvement. It won't be the headline news story that we might hope for, but it will improve care not only for your patients, but also for your caregivers.